How does an enforcer, built to preserve a crew's power, become the single greatest liability to that same crew? This investigation looks at Tommy DeSimone as a case study in how impulsive violence, sloppy operational security, and fractured loyalties converted tactical advantage into sustained risk for organized crime and for the law enforcement agencies trying to contain it. Thomas James DeSimone operated in New York City during the 1960s and 1970s. He was an associate of the Lucchese crime family who worked closely with Paul Vario, Henry Hill, and James "Jimmy the Gent" Burke. DeSimone accumulated a reputation as an aggressive enforcer and as someone willing to use extreme violence to settle disputes. His name appears in reporting and court histories that document two particularly consequential events for his crew: the 1970 killing of William "Billy Bats" Bentvena and his role in the 1978 Lufthansa cargo terminal robbery at JFK. These events and their aftermath help explain both his operational role and the legal outcomes that followed. The case centers on a small set of high-impact crimes. First, in 1970, William "Billy Bats" Bentvena, a made member of another crime family, was beaten and killed in a confrontation involving DeSimone. Second, DeSimone was one of the associates identified as participating in the December 11, 1978 Lufthansa heist, which netted nearly $6 million in cash and jewelry from a cargo terminal. In the immediate aftermath of the heist, several people tied to the robbery were murdered, a pattern that drew significant attention. DeSimone himself disappeared in early 1979 and is widely believed to have been killed. These are the facts that shaped the investigation and the legal responses. Initial crime reporting and evidence gathering. After the Lufthansa robbery, investigators located the getaway van. That vehicle linked the crime scene to individuals through physical evidence. Police reports and contemporaneous reporting show the discovery of the van led to early identification of suspects. Finding that vehicle created the first tangible investigative lead. Forensic and field work. Standard police work followed. Officers processed the van for prints and other trace evidence. Detectives interviewed witnesses and pursued paper trails tied to the airline and cargo handlers. The combination of physical evidence and labor source inquiries established a list of persons of interest connected to the airport operation. Pattern recognition and motive analysis. Once murders began among people linked to the heist, investigators shifted to a pattern-based approach. Multiple killings of people who had participated in or knew about the robbery suggested an effort to remove witnesses and consolidate the loot. Detectives recognized that motive for the subsequent homicides could be both internal discipline and financial self-preservation. Use of informants and prosecution strategy. The decisive investigative turn came when Henry Hill was arrested in 1980 and agreed to cooperate with federal authorities. Hill provided testimony on a wide array of criminal activity, which in time produced convictions for a number of related offenses and supplied investigators with narrative context for earlier crimes. That agreement demonstrated the law enforcement strategy of trading testimony from an insider in exchange for prosecutorial assistance. What law enforcement did well and what failed. What worked? Physical evidence from the van produced leads. This is an example of basic crime scene work producing actionable intelligence. Leveraging a cooperating insider ultimately unlocked a large amount of corroborating detail. Hill's cooperation resulted in convictions in other cases and in a more complete account of who did what. What failed or was limited? Many of the most significant suspects were never successfully prosecuted for the Lufthansa robbery itself. Authorities obtained convictions against only a small number tied directly to the heist. The crime's complex criminal network and the rapid removal or silencing of witnesses limited prosecutorial options. Murder victims and destroyed evidence diminish the probability of building courtroom-ready cases. When participants are killed or intimidated, forensic and testimonial evidence shrinks. This is a recurring limit of investigations into organized crime. Reliance on a single major informant creates vulnerability. Informant testimony can be powerful, but it is also subject to credibility attacks and can leave gaps when corroboration is unavailable. Hill's testimony helped in many ways, but could not reconstruct or recover the entire stolen sum. How he operated. DeSimone functioned as an enforcer and a hands-on participant in hijackings and robberies. He was quick to use violence and capable of carrying out executions on short notice. His role fit the immediate tactical needs of a crew that relied on intimidation and the controlled removal of threats. What exposed him? Several factors exposed DeSimone. First, his willingness to commit conspicuous violence created enemies across family lines. The murder of William "Billy" Batts was one such act that drew retaliation and heightened scrutiny. Second, involvement in a high-profile federal crime like the Lufthansa heist magnified investigative attention. Third, actions by associates, such as leaving the van in a public area, produced forensic links back to the crew. Finally, the trail that emerged when an insider later cooperated with investigators placed DeSimone's actions into a broader narrative investigators could follow. Why his control failed. DeSimone's mixture of impulsivity and brutality eroded the internal discipline that insulated criminal operations. In organized crime, operational security depends on controlled violence and adherence to group norms. When an associate's actions provoke other groups or draw law enforcement attention, leaders must either rein them in or accept the added risk. In DeSimone's case, the violence attracted retaliation and suspicion, and it increased the pressure from both rival crews and federal investigators. That dynamic undermined the stability of his position. Legal outcomes and unresolved issues. Legal outcomes were uneven. Federal and local authorities pursued multiple leads over many years. Henry Hill's cooperation led to dozens of convictions in related matters, and some key figures faced sentences for crimes connected to the same networks. However, the Lufthansa heist itself produced only a small number of direct convictions. Louis Werner, an insider, was one of the few to be imprisoned in relation to the robbery. James Burke and others were linked by investigators to the heist and to post-heist murders, but many ties were never solidified in court on the heist charge. DeSimone disappeared in January 1979 and was never tried. His fate remains part of the unresolved record. Lessons from the case. Violence as an operational liability. Excessive or unregulated violence can be a strategic error. It draws attention and provokes retaliation. Law enforcement benefits from patterns created by such conduct. This case demonstrates the operational cost of impulsive violence. The fragility of investigative evidence in organized crime. When participants are murdered or evidence is deliberately destroyed, investigations lose critical channels for prosecution. Protecting witnesses and preserving physical evidence are essential but often difficult in this environment. Informants are powerful but incomplete tools. Insider testimony can change an investigation's course. However, it creates dependency on a single source and can fail to produce convictions when corroborating evidence is missing. Cross-agency coordination matters. Large-scale criminal operations cross jurisdictions and investigative boundaries. Improving coordination among local, state, and federal agencies increases the likelihood of converting leads into prosecutions. Social and institutional impacts remain today. The Lufthansa heist and its aftermath illustrate how organized crime can infiltrate legitimate systems such as transportation and labor. The case highlights the need for oversight in those systems and for resources dedicated to following complex financial trails. Tommy DeSimone's life and disappearance are not a Hollywood morality play. They're a practical lesson in how individual behavior affects organizational risk, and how law enforcement grapples with incomplete evidence, violent silencing of witnesses, and the limits of testimony. The case matters because it shows the interplay of human impulses and institutional responses. Understanding that interplay improves investigative practice and informs public policy on witness protection, interagency cooperation, and preventive controls in critical industries. The goal is not to sensationalize. It is to learn from a real set of failures and partial successes so future violence and losses can be reduced.